Sam Weston learned early that in his family, love came with a scoreboard. He didn't have a place on it. Raised by his grandmother in the peeling edges of a forgotten town, Sam grew up stitching dreams from scraps. Scraps of fabric, scraps of hope, scraps of dignity. His parents had vanished long before he could remember their faces, leaving only a silent scandal, and a grandmother who refused to let him vanish too. Every family gathering was a stage, and Sam was the shadow moving behind the curtains. He wasn't the varsity star or the scholarship darling. He wasn't even the cautionary tale worth a warning. He was just there, quiet, bookish. A boy who preferred sketch pads over footballs, words over fists, sincerity over spectacle. In a world that praised the loud and the proud, Sam's existence was a threadbare whisper. Nobody bothered to listen to his grandmother. Margaret saw him differently. Her hands, calloused from years at the sewing machine, never hesitated when they ruffled his hair or straightened his battered hand-me-down sweaters. "You're meant for something they can't even imagine yet," she would say, her voice a stitch in the fraying fabric of his world. Sam believed her because if he didn't, he wasn't sure he'd believe anything at all. The town treated Margaret like an odd relic, an old woman with a useless grandson clinging to her apron strings. But she never bowed her head. She patched clothes for nickels, baked bread for fundraisers she was never invited to, and saved every spare dollar in a rusted coffee tin, labeled simply for Sam. No one else called him family. No one else needed to. When the invitation arrived, Sam wasn't surprised. It was embossed, overly formal, scented faintly of something expensive. The Weston family reunion and celebration of achievement, it read in swirling gold letters. Beneath it, in plainer text, a footnote, honoring Connor Weston's acceptance into Harvard University. No mention of Sam, of course, not even as a guest of honor for surviving a childhood. Most of them wouldn't have lasted a month in. He was simply expected to show up to clap, to blend into the backdrop like he always had. Margaret's eyes twinkled when she read the invitation aloud, her hands trembling slightly as she placed it carefully back on the kitchen counter. "Big day for the family," she said, a catch in her throat that Sam chose to ignore. He knew she was proud of him, even if no one else dared to be. There was no question of attending or not. Sam would go if only for her, for the woman who had given him everything when everyone else had given him up. He ironed the only dress shirt he owned, the sleeves slightly too long, the collar a little frayed. He combed his hair, polished his scuffed shoes, and tucked a worn leather portfolio under his arm. It wasn't much, but it carried everything that mattered. His acceptance letters, his first architecture award, the offer that had changed his life. Proof not for them, but maybe for himself, that he had built something from the ruins they left him. The drive to the reunion felt like traveling through time, past the gas station where he'd once sold handmade cards to buy school supplies, past the library where he spent more evenings than he could count, hiding among the quiet aisles because home was sometimes too cold, too small, too full of silence. Past the park where the other kids had jeered and called him names he didn't yet understand just because he didn't throw a football like they did, didn't stand like they thought he should. The reunion was held at his Uncle Grant's estate, a sprawling manicured property that looked plucked from a real estate magazine. The kind of place where the windows shone a little too cleanly and the smiles at the door stretched a little too tight. White tents billowed in the breeze. Waiters in crisp black vests floated between tables balancing trays of sparkling cider and finger foods Sam couldn't pronounce. There were photo booths, a live jazz band, and banners that screamed, "Congratulations, Connor," in deep crimson. Sam felt the weight of the stairs before he even crossed the threshold. They looked at him like a guest who had wandered into the wrong celebration. Aunt Lillian barely masked her grimace. His cousin Jenna offered a limp half-wave before turning her back. Even Uncle Grant, whose house it was, nodded with a perfunctory politeness reserved for distant acquaintances, not blood. There was no seat reserved for Sam at the head tables. Instead, he found a folding chair tucked near the restroom hallway where the door creaked open and shut with every passing guest. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. He sat quietly adjusting the hem of his sleeve, ignoring the pitying glances and the not-so-subtle whispers. The first toast was for Connor's unparalleled achievements. The second was for the Weston's proud legacy. The third was for the future leaders of America. As if Sam's own future hadn't already outpaced every expectation set for him. He clapped when appropriate, smiled when necessary, and waited. Not for validation, not even for revenge. Just for the right moment, because Sam Weston hadn't come to blend in anymore. He had come to be seen. The heat under the white tents thickened, as the afternoon dragged on, clinging to Sam's skin like another unwelcome layer. The air smelled of grilled meat, cheap perfume, and expectation, the kind that suffocated you more effectively than any summer humidity could. Plates clinked, laughter rose and fell. In waves and beneath it all, a constant current pulsed pride. Swollen and gleaming, reserved for someone else, Sam watched Connor bask in it. His cousin wore his success like a crown, posing for endless photographs, laughing too loudly, shaking hands with the important uncles and the gossipy aunts, who now clung to him like barnacles to a ship they hoped would carry their own names a little further. Connor had always been the golden boy, but now he gleamed so brightly it made everyone else seem dimmer by comparison, especially Sam. An announcement cut through the chatter, a microphone squealing slightly before the booming voice of Uncle Grant filled the tent. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family," he bellowed. "Today is not just another reunion. Today we gather to honor one of our own, young Connor Weston, for achieving what no one else in this family has ever achieved, acceptance into Harvard University." The applause was thunderous. Some even whistled and stomped. Sam clapped too politely, knowing that anything less would draw attention. The wrong kind. His hands stung from the force of it, but he kept the smile pinned to his face like a badge of survival. His seat tucked beside the restroom hallway where doors swung open and shut with a mechanical groan, offered the perfect vantage point, far enough to be invisible, close enough to hear every word, not meant for him. Connor beamed as he stood adjusting the expensive watch glinting on his wrist. He launched into a practiced speech about hard work, discipline, and never letting anyone else define your worth, a statement so deeply ironic that Sam almost laughed aloud. Connor had been defined by others his whole life. The right look, the right grades, the right handshake. Sam knew because once upon a time they'd been just two boys chasing fireflies behind Margaret's old house, before the world had decided who mattered. When Connor finished, the family surged forward. Hugs, handshakes, congratulations, spilling over one another like champagne. Sam remained at his table, sipping lukewarm lemonade from a plastic cup, trying not to flinch as the occasional glance slid over him like he was a stain on the party linen. It was Aunt Meredith who finally noticed, or pretended to. She glided over all florals and forced smiles, balancing a plate stacked high with hors d'oeuvres she had no intention of eating. Standing above him, she tilted her head and spoke just loud enough for nearby tables to overhear. "And what about you, Sam?" she said, voice syrupy sweet. "Still working those little side projects? Or did you find a real job yet?" The pause after real job hung heavily thick with implication. Someone chuckled. Sam felt the heat creep up his neck, but forced himself to stay composed. He knew the script. They expected him to mumble something self-deprecating, to shrink into himself, to confirm the narrative they had written for him, long before he could write his own. He simply smiled, small and enigmatic, and took another sip of lemonade. Aunt Meredith, unsatisfied, pressed further. "You know not everyone is cut out for academia," she said, casting a meaningful glance toward the crowd now swarming around Connor again. "Or other lifestyles." There it was. The old wound poked and prodded in front of an audience Sam had come out to his family years ago. Most had reacted with strained tolerance at best. Icy silence at worst. None had ever celebrated it, let alone acknowledged it with anything resembling respect. Sam set his cup down carefully, deliberate. The weight of it felt like the weight he'd carried his whole life, heavy, unseen, unwelcome. Across the lawn, he caught Margaret's gaze. She sat alone in at a small table near the perimeter of the tent, her frail hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes steady and sure. She gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Sam rose from his seat. He didn't announce himself. He didn't clear his throat or demand attention. He simply walked forward, moving through the clusters of relatives who parted like the Red Sea, curious and cautious. When he reached the microphone stand, abandoned after Connor's speech, he picked it up, steadying it with one hand. The chatter dwindled. Heads turned, a few phones discreetly lifted, ready to capture what promised to be a delicious new family scandal. Sam let the silence stretch, not as a weapon, but as an offering. If they wanted a show, he would give them something real. "I want to congratulate Connor," he said finally, his voice clear, carrying easily to the back of the tent. "Getting into Harvard is an incredible achievement. It deserves celebration." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sam smiled slightly, holding the moment in his hands like a live wire, and he continued, "It's funny, Because just last week I signed my new contract as a lecturer at Harvard. Gasps cut through the sticky heat like lightning. A stunned, disbelieving laughter bubbled up from somewhere, quickly silenced by the realization that Sam wasn't joking. He pulled a folded letter from his portfolio, an official letter with the university's seal, and held it up just briefly before tucking it away again. "I'll be teaching architectural theory and social spaces," Sam added, his tone light, almost conversational. "Next semester, I'll even be overseeing some first-year mentorships. Who knows, maybe I'll see a familiar face in my classes." His gaze flickered to Connor, who stood frozen, the color draining from his face. Sam didn't stay to watch the fallout. He lowered the microphone onto the stand, gave a small, courteous nod to no one in particular, and walked away from the stunned silence. Behind him, the party unraveled. Whispers, rapid-fire questions darting. Glances. Margaret, bless her stubborn heart, stood slowly from her chair and began to clap. Just once, twice, a third time, deliberate and slow. Nobody joined her. Sam didn't need them to. He had already built a home from the ruins they left him, and it was standing taller than any of them could ever reach. Story. Part 3, The Weight of Quiet. The late afternoon sun slanted low across the lawn, gilding the chaos Sam left behind in a weary gold. He walked without hurrying, the hum of stunned whispers thinning as he moved further from the tent, from the clinking glasses and forced laughter, trying desperately to stitch the party back together. No one stopped him. No one called out. The same mouths that once filled with ridicule now found themselves empty. At the edge of the sprawling estate, near a small gravel path that wound down toward the orchard, a single figure waited. Margaret Weston, his grandmother, standing with her back impossibly straight, her small frame dwarfed by the vastness of the place. In the dying light, she looked almost spectral, a woman carved from stubbornness and a lifetime of holding others together while no one thought to hold her. Sam reached her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He simply took her hand, felt the paper-thin skin stretched over veins and bones, and squeezed gently. She squeezed back with surprising strength, her eyes bright beneath the delicate folds of age. "You didn't have to," Margaret said finally, her voice rough with unshed emotion. Not disappointment, not fear, just an ache too old to name. Sam shook his head, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I didn't do it for them." They walked slowly down the gravel path, small stones crunching underfoot. The orchard beyond the estate had been left untended, wild and overgrown, much like the parts of their family. No one wanted to claim Sam liked it better that way. Nature had reclaimed what arrogance had abandoned. Margaret held onto his arm as they walked. "They'll spin it. You know," she murmured, half amusement, half warning. "Say, you embarrassed them, that you made a scene." Sam gave a low, breathless laugh. "Let them. They've been writing my story wrong since before I could read. It's time I started telling it myself." They found a weathered bench tucked beneath an old apple tree, its branches heavy with fruit that would soon fall and rot unnoticed. Margaret sat first, arranging her skirt neatly, and Sam dropped beside her with the kind of unguarded exhaustion he rarely allowed himself to feel. For a long while they sat in silence, the kind that isn't awkward or heavy but familiar, like an old quilt stitched from years of understanding. "You know," Margaret said after a time, "I remember when you were about 5. The first time the school called me in because you colored outside the lines on purpose. They thought it meant something was wrong with you." Sam smiled, remembering the thick, waxy crayons, the disapproving scowl of his kindergarten teacher. "They didn't understand," Margaret continued, her voice dipping lower, "that you were never meant to fit inside their little boxes. You were born to redraw the whole damn page." Sam leaned back against the rough wood of the bench, letting the truth of her words settle into the cracks he still carried inside. "They didn't just ignore you, Sam," she said softer now. "They feared you because you couldn't be bent into their version of success. You didn't chase the things they said mattered. Money, status, approval. You chased meaning, and meaning scares people who have none." The orchard creaked in the warm breeze, leaves whispering secrets to no one in particular. Sam closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the earth breathe beneath him. "I used to think," he said finally, voice low, "that if I worked hard enough, if I succeeded big enough, they'd see me differently. That maybe they'd be proud." Margaret placed a hand on his knee, gnarled and sure. "Pride like that is cheap. It costs you your soul and buys you nothing. You don't need their applause to be real." A lump rose unbidden in his throat. He swallowed hard, blinking against the blur that crowded his vision. "You built yourself," Margaret said, her voice unwavering. "Board by board, dream by dream. Not from the legacy they denied you, but from the love they couldn't kill in you." The sky deepened into hues of lavender and flame. Somewhere back under the tents, music started again. Louder, faster, almost desperate, as if by turning up the volume they could drown out what had happened. Pretend it hadn't shaken something loose they could no longer control. Sam rose from the bench and offered Margaret his hand. She took it with no hesitation, allowing him to lift her carefully to her feet. Together, they made their way back toward the modest sedan parked near the servants' entrance, a stark contrast to the gleaming SUVs and luxury sedans lined up in front. Before opening the door, Margaret turned to him, her expression fierce. "Whatever you do next," she said, "do it for you, not for them, never again for them." Sam nodded, the words settling into his bones, steady and true. As they pulled away from the estate, the party dwindled in the rearview mirror, just a smear of noise and light against the encroaching night. Sam didn't look back. He had always thought he wanted a seat at their table. Tonight he realized he'd been building his own all along. Stronger, truer, unbreakable, and it was finally time to sit at it. Story, Part 4, An Unexpected Knock. The night had long folded itself into silence by the time Sam pulled into Margaret's narrow driveway. The small house, patched and leaning, with the weight of years, stood like a tired sentinel against the darkness. Sam cut the engine but didn't move, letting the ticking of the cooling motor fill the car. Margaret had fallen asleep on the ride home, her breath slow and steady in the passenger seat, a rhythm Sam found more comforting than any song on the radio. He sat there a long while after easing her inside and settling her into bed, listening to the quiet tick of the clock in the kitchen, the creak of old floorboards settling. The house smelled like lavender and clean laundry, and something older, something like memory. Sam brewed a pot of coffee he knew he wouldn't finish and stood by the window, mug in hand, watching the empty street. The world outside felt 1,000 miles away from the glossy cruelty of the afternoon. But Sam's mind kept replaying it, the way they had looked right through him until they couldn't anymore. He should have felt triumphant. He should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt tired, like a man who had reached the top of a mountain only to find that the view wasn't what he expected. Maybe it had never been about being seen. Maybe it had always been about seeing himself clearly for the first time. The knock came just after midnight, soft but insistent. Sam tensed, setting down his mug. Visitors weren't common here, especially not at this hour. He crossed the living room quickly and pulled open the door without flipping on the porch light. Standing there, hands jammed deep into the pockets of a rumpled blazer, was Connor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The younger man shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, his polished shoes dusted with gravel. In the dim light, Sam could see the edges of his cousin's perfect image, unraveling, tie, loosened hair, must the sheen of easy arrogance gone. "I didn't know where else to go," Connor said finally, voice hoarse from too many forced smiles. Sam leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. He said nothing. Waiting, Connor exhaled a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," he blurted out, words tumbling over themselves. "For everything, for all the years I didn't know how much I was playing into it." Sam studied him carefully. This wasn't the Connor he had known, the golden boy who had floated effortlessly atop the tide of family favoritism. This was someone else, someone unsteady. "I thought," Connor continued, rubbing a hand over his face, "that if I just kept being what they wanted, it would mean something, that it would be enough." Sam's chest tightened unexpectedly. A pang of recognition, sharp and unwelcome. He knew that hunger, knew it too well, but it never is, Connor said quieter now. "Is it?" Sam stepped back, opening the door wider without a word. Connor hesitated, then stepped inside, shedding his blazer like a weight he no longer wanted to carry. They sat in the living room side by side, but not touching the worn couch, sagging slightly under their combined weight. Connor stared at the floor, knees bouncing with restless energy. "I didn't even want Harvard," he admitted after a long pause. "Dad wanted it. Mom needed it. They made me feel like if I didn't get in, I wasn't worth anything." Sam's mind flashed back to his own acceptance letters, celebrated only by Margaret with a pie she couldn't afford to bake. No banners, no parties, just pride so real. It hurt to look at. "They gave you the crown," Sam said finally, voice low, "but it cost you the kingdom." Connor looked up sharply, something breaking open behind his eyes. For the first time, Sam didn't see the cousin he had envied, the rival he had resented. He saw a boy trying to be enough for people who only love reflections of themselves. "They told me about you," Connor said, almost whispering, "about when you came out, how you shamed the family." His mouth twisted bitterly. "I believe them." Sam said nothing. There was nothing to say. Wounds that old didn't heal with a few late-night apologies. "But today," Connor continued, "when you stood there, when you said it, I realized—" He broke off, swiping angrily at his eyes. "You weren't the shame. You were the only honest thing in that whole damn tent." The confession hung between them, raw and shaking. "I want to do better," Connor said, voice cracking. "I don't know how, but I'm tired of being what they want." Sam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, feeling the old anger fade into something heavier but softer sorrow. Compassion, maybe? He thought about Margaret, about her hands steadying his world one stitch at a time, about what it meant to choose love over fear. "You start," Sam said, "by being someone you're proud to know." Connor nodded slowly, the enormity of the task settling onto his shoulders. They sat there long after the coffee had gone cold, two broken branches from the same tree trying to grow in a different direction. Outside, the night deepened, stars pricking the dark like small, stubborn hopes refusing to be erased. For the first time in a long while, Sam didn't feel alone. Story, Part 5, The Table He Built. Morning broke softly over Margaret's little house, painting the cracked walls and worn floorboards. In shades of honey and rose, Sam sat at the kitchen table, the old one Margaret had kept since before he was born, running his fingers over the scars and nicks carved deep into its surface. It was a table that had seen birthdays without candles, holidays without gifts, and dinners that stretched scraps into something resembling a feast. Across from him, Margaret dozed in her chair, a blanket tucked around her shoulders, her breathing steady and even. Connor had long since fallen asleep, curled up on the living room couch, exhaustion finally overtaking guilt. The house was full in a way Sam hadn't realized he missed, not with noise or obligations, but with presence. With something real, he sipped coffee that had gone bitter with time and thought about all the years he had spent chasing after tables. He thought he was supposed to sit at tables where worth was measured in achievements, polished like trophies, in smiles that tightened when you weren't looking, in love so conditional it might as well have come with fine print. He thought about the boy he used to be, the boy who believed that if he colored carefully inside the lines, someone would finally pull out a chair for him, but no one ever had. And sitting here in the tender hush of a new day, Sam understood why that was the greatest gift. He had never belonged at their tables because he was meant to build his own, a place not made of polished veneers or whispered judgments, but of battered wood and steady hands. A place big enough for people who carried scars instead of pedigrees. A place where no one asked you to apologize for being exactly who you were. Sam looked at Margaret, her chin tucked against her chest, her silver hair catching the sunlight like a halo. He thought of every stitch she had sewn, every meal she had stretched, every word of quiet defiance she had whispered into the hollow spaces of his life. Without her, there would have been no table at all. A soft knock rattled the screen door. Sam rose and found a small brown envelope wedged between the door and the frame. No sender, no note. Inside was a photograph, one of those grainy instant shots from the reunion the day before. It showed Margaret standing alone under the white tent clapping. Everyone else had turned away. Everyone else had chosen to miss the moment, but there she was, clapping anyway, smiling anyway. Sam pressed the photo to his chest for a long moment, breathing it in like oxygen. He placed it on the kitchen table, weighting it down with a chipped mug. Not to hide it, not to forget, but to remember. Applause that matters doesn't come from a crowd. It comes from the few who never stop seeing you, even when the world turns its head. Later that afternoon, when Connor woke, they would sit around that scarred old table with Margaret sharing coffee and bread and whatever dreams they were brave enough to name aloud. No banners, no speeches, just a new kind of celebration. One built not on achievements, but on presence, on truth, on the quiet, defiant act of choosing each other again and again. Sam didn't know where the road ahead would lead. There would be more reunions he wouldn't attend, more invitations he wouldn't receive. But he also knew this: the foundation he had laid, made of stitched promises and stubborn hope, was strong enough to hold him. For the first time, it was enough. He was enough. And he wasn't building it for them anymore. He was building it for the ones who stayed for himself, for the ones yet to come. Have you ever realized you were meant to build your own table instead of waiting for a seat at someone else's? Share your story with us. We'd love to hear how you claimed your place. For more real stories of quiet triumphs, found family, and unstoppable resilience, subscribe to Heart Stories. Your voice and your victory matters.